Welcome to the 81st episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today, we are here to do a breakdown on UFC Paris. That was obviously headlined by Ciryl Gane and Tuivasa, another big fight with Robert Whittaker versus Marvin Vittori. So we're going to talk about those fights and a couple other fights on the card. We're not going to talk about every single fight on the card, but we're going to touch on most of them. And then that is going to be the only thing I have for today because I will be back later in the week to do a preview for UFC 279. That will probably come out on Thursday or Friday. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. But that means this episode will be a little bit shorter. So we should be able to get in and get out very quickly today. Now, like I said, today, we are talking about UFC Paris, and that was obviously headlined by Ciryl Gane and Tuivasa. This was a really, really good fight. Very entertaining. You know, sometimes when you have these heavyweight fights, you can run into this situation where, you know, it's not very entertaining because someone like Ciryl Gane could stay on the outside and really pick Tuivasa apart if he chose to, and not take very many risks. And, you know, that kind of leads to, I don't want to say a boring fight, but a very technical 5-round decision. That is not what we had here. We had these two exchanging a lot of power strikes. The first round was a little slow, and then when that second round rolled around, they really started trading. They really started trading. Ty landed a couple of really good hooks. He dropped Ciryl Gane in that second round, landed at least one good ground and pound shot as well. I don't think it was, you know, a clean ground and pound shot, but it was still a very good ground and pound shot. Ciryl Gane was very impressive in working back to his feet and staying in that fight. And from there, one of the two things I should say that were really the staple of Ciryl Gane's game plan to help him get that win was his jab and his kicks to the body. Well, I should say straight strikes. You know, mostly the jab, but he threw some good straights in there as well. For those jabs, you know, great way to maintain distance while doing damage. That jab looked very, very powerful. When he landed it, it was doing some damage. And I think that was reflected by the damage on Ty's face and kind of how he progressively worked and eventually got that finish. As for the kicks to the body, we saw a good mix of teeps and your traditional kick to the body, your roundhouse to the body. And those, against someone like Ty, those are really good weapons. The teep can help you manage distance a little bit, and that also does damage, but those roundhouse kicks to the body do a lot of damage. And with Ty's stance, you know, his hands were a little bit higher, so that kind of creates that opportunity to land that shot a little bit more. And once he was able to find it, he went back to it, and continued to have success. There were a couple times where it looked like he had Ty hurt to the body. I am not exactly sure how hurt Ty really was. I think there were a couple of instances where he was playing some rope-a-dope, where he was acting like he really got hurt to the body, and then he would throw an overhand, trying to get Ciryl Gane to overcommit on that finish. But Ciryl Gane was able to stay safe and avoid those. Very good on his part. And then from there, he landed some good head kicks as well. You know me, I love a good head kick. Ciryl Gane landed a head kick that would have KO'd a lot of opponents in that division. But Ty Tuivasa ate that. That is one of the things that has impressed me with Ty in his fights is he does have a really, really good chin. I think Derek Lewis landed a couple of really good shots against him too. So, you know, that chin has held up for him, and that kind of assists in his fighting style. And, you know, he landed a good front kick as well. So Ciryl Gane really had all of his weapons going, and then he eventually landed that finish in that third round. Great finishing sequence, and, you know, he hit him with a couple of strong hooks that really, really hurt him. But, you know, there was a shot to the back of the head there, and as methodical and as good as that finish was, that one strike to the back of the head does kind of suck to see. I do, I'm not too upset about it. I know there are some people that are really upset and are using that as a talking point for Ciryl Gane. However, I don't think that really changed the outcome of the fight. I think that Tuivasa was out at that moment anyways. Well, I shouldn't say out, but Ciryl Gane was on his way to winning that fight. I think if you just, pick that strike out of there, I don't think the outcome of the fight changes at all. And that is not to say that, I'm giving Ciryl Gane a pass, because it does really suck to see those strikes to the back of the head. And I think those are, not adequately punished when they are landed. Most of the time, we just see referees say, always, don't punch him in the back of the head, don't punch him in the back of the head. But we never see any firm action taken with those strikes, so sometimes they're unavoidable. I'm not saying that every single strike to the back of the head. For example, Gane versus JDS, some people said it was at the back of the head. You have a large portion of that connected on the ear, and some of it on the jaw, if I'm remembering that correctly. But JDS was also turning away at the same time, so that kind of moves the target. And when the head moves and you're throwing a strike, that goes from hitting them in the jaw to closer to the ear and closer to the back of the head. So I don't necessarily think that Ciryl Gane is a dirty fighter. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that is something that, if that trend continues, that's not something that you really want to see. So I'm not trying to discredit his performance at all. I still think he had a great performance. I think he gets the finish without that strike. But I just felt that it was something that I should address and not just gloss over. Now, when we're looking at these two guys and their careers and where they currently sit, Ciryl Gane is in a really, really good spot. Obviously, he lost to Francis Ngannou. That is the only loss on his resume. And he currently sits at the number one spot in the rankings. He was number one, and then he defended that against Tuivasa. So very, very, beneficial for him, this fight proved to be. Now, my question is, what is going on at the heavyweight division? What exactly are they going to do with Ciryl Gane? And I don't think we really have the answers to that question, because when I look at the heavyweight division, there are other questions that need to be answered before you can answer the question of what does Ciryl Gane, do next. First and foremost, when is Francis Ngannou returning? Is he returning in February or March? Because that has been the long time, thought or plan or prediction that he returns first quarter of 2023. And I know that sounds like a long time, but in reality, it's quickly approaching. We're already in September. The UFC already has their pay-per-view schedule booked through November. So in reality, there's 1, 2, 3, or 4 pay-per-views that need to get scheduled prior to a Francis Ngannou pay-per-view being scheduled. So for Francis, he's really not as far out on a return as many people like to think. And then from there, what is Jon Jones doing? Is Jon Jones still looking to fight Stipe Miocic, right? Because I was a big advocate of that fight for when I thought that fight was going to take place in July or June or September. That fight made a lot more sense at that point in time. You didn't have to have Jon Jones and Stipe both sit on the sideline waiting for Francis Ngannou to return. But if you're Jon Jones right now and you're going, okay, should I fight Stipe Miocic for what is, possibly an interim belt or a number one contenders bout? Should I fight Stipe Miocic in December when Francis Ngannou is looking to return 2 to 3 months later? It really doesn't make any sense anymore. In July, if those two fought, that would have been a great test for Jon Jones to fight someone who's a little bit on the smaller side of heavyweight. Stipe Miocic's obviously very, very big and would be very, much, much bigger than anyone Jon Jones has ever fought. However, he's not as big as Francis. So that would have been a good, step up in competition in terms of pure physicality before he got to Francis. However, once again, what's the point of making that fight in December if, you can turn around and if you can fight the, UFC champion several months later? And I'm not sure that Jon Jones is currently in the state of his career where he fights in December and then again in March. If he does that and takes out, Stipe and Francis in a 3 or 4 or 5 month span, credit to him. But I'm not necessarily sure that is something that Jon would do. I'm not saying he can't do it, but I'm not necessarily sure that is something that, in reality, we see that happen. Now, from there, we're one step down the totem pole. What does Stipe Miocic do, right? What does Stipe do? Because if Stipe fights Jon, that's obviously the number one fight that he would want. He probably wants that rematch. But if Francis and Jon both fight, what's the next best option for him? Probably a match with Ciryl Gane. Because if Stipe can beat Ciryl Gane, in my opinion, there is without a shadow of the doubt that he deserves another opportunity to fight for the belt, whether Jon or Francis or whoever holds that belt. If you can beat if you can beat Ciryl Gane, you deserve an opportunity at that belt. So now that puts us at Ciryl Gane. Like I said, those 3 fights ahead of him, Francis, Jon Jones, Stipe. I'm getting repetitive, but they're all kind of interconnected here, where he's going to be the 4th guy that they consider booking probably out of those guys. And if he doesn't get a fight with Stipe, who are they going to make him fight? The top-ranked guy that we have is currently Curtis Blaydes, who's unbooked and is not named Tai Tuivasa or any other fighter that we have previously mentioned. If I'm Ciryl Gane, I'm not, raising my hand to fight Curtis Blaydes. Does that fight make a level of sense? I think it does. I think Curtis Blaydes has done some really good work in the heavyweight division. However, once again, Ciryl Gane is, in my opinion, in an elite tier of heavyweights that I'm not sure Curtis Blaydes is in. I think Curtis Blaydes could be in that tier of heavyweights, right? I think Curtis Blaydes currently sits right on the outside. I think one more win against a top 5 guy, a top 6 guy, could get him, that respect. If we're looking at the rankings for Curtis Blaydes, if he were to go beat Sergey Pavlich or Tai Tuivasa, then maybe I would be more inclined to throw him in that conversation. But, especially when his last win was Tom Aspinall, I'm not sure that you want to throw him right there in that top 2. Because that is, or, if he's fighting Ciryl Gane, that is the top 1. I would like to see one more fight and one more, big-time win before that fight happens. Went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But, if Ciryl Gane, doesn't get one of those big fights, he's not going to be raising his hands to fight Curtis Blaydes, to fight Sergey Pavlich, to fight Tom Aspinall, to fight, any of these guys. So I really don't know where the heavyweight division goes at this point. Ciryl Gane may have to take, 6 months off, not because he was looking to be inactive, but because there just isn't anything that makes sense for him right now. And, you can have that dust settle a little bit at heavyweight and have some of the confusions and questions answered, and then you get a fight booked and you have a better picture of where the division currently stands. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, for Tai Tuivasa, shouldn't slide too far in these rankings. He lost to Ciryl Gane, who Ciryl Gane is, like I said earlier, currently ranked number 1, well-deserving. So Tai Tuivasa shouldn't slide so far in these rankings. And when I look at these rankings, I see 4 names that should get booked up in one way or another. You have Tai Tuivasa at 3, you have Curtis Blaydes at 4, you have Sergey Pavlich at 5, you have Tom Aspinall at 6. I would like to see those 4 guys paired up in 2 fights. I think that makes sense. I know everyone has a different timetable for return. I'm sure Tom Aspinall will be out a while. And maybe Tai Tuivasa is looking to take time off after that loss. we don't really know what his timetable for return is. So at this point, it probably looks like Ty and Aspinall would make the most sense based off when we could see them back in the octagon, and then Curtis Blades versus Sergey Pavlovich. At the same time, if Ty Tuivasa wants to return and return quickly, I think a fight between Ty and Sergey Pavlovich is a very entertaining fight, a fun fight, and I think that gives us a good assessment of where both of those guys stand amongst the elite of the elite at heavyweight. And then outside of that, you're looking at Derek Lewis, who Derek Lewis is coming off some losses. He needs to get in the win column again. Alexander Volkov. Volkov looked good against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, but once again, maybe you can do Volkov versus like a Sergey Pavlovich. Maybe. I'm not even convinced that makes sense. Maybe a Volkov versus Marcin Tybura. But, that 7 to 10, slot in the rankings, there are some questions and some concerns. Marcin Tybura has looked really good lately, so he should probably get a big opportunity. But, for the most part, once you get outside of that top 6 at heavyweight, we start seeing some rematches because Derek Lewis, Alexander Volkov, and Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and Marcin Tybura have all, really had a lot of fights in that division and have fought a lot of ranked competition. So we may have to be looking at some rematches, but booking that heavyweight division is going to be very, very hard, and I'm not exactly sure how the matchmakers are going to navigate that. Now, we talked quite a bit about heavyweight, so now we're going to move on to middleweight, where we saw the number 1 ranked middleweight and the number tied for number 2, the number 2 ranked middleweight in Marvin Vittori square off. What else can you say than, credit to Robert Whittaker? And, he looked really, really good. I mean, the first round was close, but I thought he won. But the second and third rounds were both just outstanding. Robert Whittaker, that is a masterclass of dealing damage without taking damage. He was able to avoid the clinch positions. He didn't let Marvin Vittori hold him up against the clinch. He, was able to, he even got a takedown in the third round. So Robert Whittaker did every single thing that you could ever ask him to do. And he did that with, the most Robert Whittaker-esque fight ever. Some really good jabs, some good straights. He threw his, patent head kick combination a couple times, and one of them landed really, really strongly, I remember. I'm not sure if that was... He did land a really good head kick, but he might not have set it up with this combination. I know he threw a couple head kicks without the combo in front of it, and he threw a couple that did have the combo in front of it. And I think he landed one really, really strong head kick. From there, it's the timing and the footwork and the accuracy and the intricacies of his striking that I really, really enjoy. He throws a really, really good lead hook where he's stepping in and, comes over the top a little bit, and he throws it at a really interesting angle, but he lands it very, very efficiently. I really don't know what to say here because I can't say I'm really surprised, and I don't think many people are surprised, but I'm more maybe in awe because I think a lot of people expected Robert Whittaker to win this fight and expected him to perform very well, but I'm not sure that many people expected him to, pitch a near perfect game here. He fought a very, very good fight, and he has made it clear that he is the best middleweight that is not named Ciryl Adesanya. He has wins over Jared Cannonier, Marvin Vittori, I believe Derek Brunson. I think he does have a win over Derek Brunson. And then, if you want to go further down in the rankings, he has some more wins. Darren Till, Kelvin Gastelum. Very impressive resume. If you were to pull up his resume and just, if you were magically able to wipe those losses of Ciryl Adesanya off his resume, he would have an incredible career, and he would be in the discussion for one of the best fighters of this generation because he would have, a lot of title defenses. If you're looking at his post Yoel Romero run, where he beat Yoel Romero that was kind of a complicated time in the history of the belt because we had some weight misses and some other things. But he beat Yoel Romero in 2017 to win the belt. And then, he beat Yoel Romero again in 2018, had a weight match there. Then he loses to Adesanya. But then he rips off wins against Darren Till, Jared Cannonier, Kelvin Gastelum, loses again to Adesanya, has another win against Vittori. If he were just to make that a title run, for example, obviously this didn't happen, but I think it is a cool hypothetical to look at. He would have wins against Yoel Romero, Darren Till, Jared Cannonier, Kelvin Gastelum, Marvin Vittori, and all of those would have likely been, title defenses. Obviously, the division plays out. He would have had to fight Paulo Costa, but if you just look at his resume through that lens, tremendous career. And that was obviously even before he fought Jacare and Derek Brunson as well. Uriah Hall on the resume too. So tremendous career for Robert Whittaker. And I have no clue what you do with Robert Whittaker now. Jared Cannonier is currently unbooked, but do we want to see that fight again? I'd like to see Robert Whittaker face some fresh competition. Derek Brunson, again, I don't really see the point in that right now. Derek Brunson is currently booked too. Maybe you wait a couple months. If Alex Pereira loses to Israel Adesanya, I think Robert Whittaker versus Alex Pereira would make a lot of sense. And if you're Robert Whittaker, getting a win over Alex Pereira would be a pretty good accomplishment, I assume. And I think that would be a fairly good matchup for him because he is good enough on the feet. He obviously doesn't have... He's an elite striker, but he's just not simply at the same level as Israel Adesanya. And possibly Alex Pereira. I'd like to see Alex Pereira fight Izzy again and see how that fight plays out and see how he performs on the feet. But Robert Whittaker would likely be able to take Alex Pereira down for 3 rounds and hold him down. At the same time, Pereira's whole point in being in the UFC is to beat Israel Adesanya, so maybe he retires if he loses. Who knows? From there, Paulo Costa, I think, what do you do with Paulo Costa is another interesting question. Paulo Costa only has 1 fight left on his deal, so I'm not sure that they'd be willing to give him the number 1 ranked fighter in the division right now. But I do believe that Whittaker and Paulo Costa is an entertaining fight. It may not make the most sense from a ranking standpoint. Paulo Costa, really hasn't done much outside of beating Luke Rockhold. He has some previous wins. He's got that good win against Romero, but the losses to Izzy and Vittori really put him on the back burner and really set him back. So, but once again, if you're Whittaker, I think the fresh blood of a Paulo Costa matchup would be worthwhile. And I think that would be something that the UFC should explore. And if the issue here is Paulo Costa only has 1 fight left on his UFC deal, we don't want to make that fight, Paulo Costa should be re-signed. Just pull up these, middleweight rankings and look at what these rankings look like if you take out Paulo Costa. These rankings aren't particularly, the depth of this division is not very impressive to me. I think this is one of the weaker male divisions right now. You have Adesanya, Whittaker, great fighters. Cannonier is your number 2 fighter, very, very good. Marvin Vittori he's probably going to be number 3 since he lost. Great fighter, but I don't think he's as good as the number 3s in some division. Derek Brunson at number 4. I mean, if you just look across this row here, we've got Islam Makhachev, Gilbert Burns, Alexander Rakic, Josh Emmett, Sandhagen. I'm not sure that Derek Brunson is as good of a fighter as a lot of those guys if you're just looking pound for pound. Heavyweight has Curtis Blades there. I think Curtis Blades is probably a little bit, of a better version of Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson, if he could strike a little bit more and had a little bit better takedowns. Alex Pereira at number 5. Pereira is good and all, but I don't think his win over Sean Strickland is that impressive because Sean Strickland came in with a terrible game plan, and Sean Strickland's his only ranked win. Paulo Costa at number 6. That's a good number 6. Sean Strickland at 7 doesn't really jump off the page at me. Jack Hermansson at 8 doesn't jump off the page at me. Darren Till at 9. I like Darren Till, and I think he can be a really good fighter, but we haven't seen him at his best for several years now. Andre Muniz at 10, I think, is a very, very good fighter, and he should probably be ranked higher and probably will be ranked higher. So just looking at that top 10 there, you can't really afford to lose Paulo Costa. He's probably one of your stronger members of that division. So basically, re-sign Paulo Costa and book him with Robert Whittaker. That's what I'm saying. Continuing a middleweight discussion, we've got Nizardine, Imavov, and Joaquin Buckley. And this fight was really, really interesting to me. Very, very interesting. I like Joaquin Buckley, but he just was not good enough to compete with Nizardine Imavov in this one. I really liked the way Emavov fought this fight, stayed on the outside, avoided those big looping strikes, avoided some head kicks, and really just peppered him with straight shots, powerful shots. Struck from a very, very good angle. He caught Joaquin Buckley in some positions where Joaquin Buckley is kind of an unorthodox striker because he has to be with his frame. And, that's not something you really see every day. And Nizardine Imavov was able to find some angles, take advantage of those angles, and really land some really solid strikes from a distance. And, he wasn't just picking and prodding at him. He was doing a lot of damage. So very, very strong performance from Nizardine Imavov. I really like him in this weight class. When I'm looking at 10 through 15, Muniz and Nizardine Imavov really jump off the page at me as guys I think can beat some of those guys that I was just talking about in that 7 to 10 range. Muniz is at 10, but you get what I'm saying. Strickland and Hermansson. I think Nizardine Imavov and Andre Muniz could possibly, if you book them up right now, Strickland versus Muniz, Hermansson versus Imavov, or flip them, Muniz versus Hermansson, Strickland versus Imavov. I think Muniz and Imavov may just sweep, both of those matchups either way you book them. Two very talented guys there. Very different fighters, but nonetheless very, very talented. So I really like what Nizardine Imavov did. I'm not necessarily here to say that Joaquin Buckley is the best win that you can have in the middleweight division. I think that there are some issues with his fighting style, and not really issues of his own. Some are, he's a big, stocky striker who's going to be way shorter than everyone he fights. He's going to struggle to get on the inside, and that's exactly what happened against Imavov. Before we talk more about Buckley, let's finish up with Imavov. But like I said, let's do Imavov versus Jack Hermansson, and see how that fight goes. I think that is a fight that makes sense, and it is a fight that I'd like to see. Now, switching over to Buckley, I wonder what Buckley weighs. I hope he can make 170 pounds because I struggle to see him find sustained success at middleweight simply with that frame. He was 5'8", and, a lot of the guys on the shorter end of that division, are around that 6 foot range. And by the way, the UFC has Joaquin Buckley listed at 5'10". Sherdog has him at 5'8". I'm willing to bet he's closer to that 5'8" range from what I've seen, but nonetheless, whatever he weighs, he gives up, a decent height advantage, and he has to punch up at every single one of his targets. He has good range, his arms are long, but he's punching upwards, and he really doesn't do great work doing that. And that's why we see him be more successful against some lower level of competition, right? Where, when you get in these rankings, these guys manage range better. These guys, it's harder to pin them up against a cage. They can circle out better. He's not exactly tremendous at cutting off the cage, guys can escape with their back off the cage. When you're looking at, the lower levels of fighters in this division, and I don't know if lower level is the right word, but guys who are not in that top 15, top 20, and top 25, just outside of that, some guys that have a couple more flaws, they do a better job, against them. Buckley can do a better job of cutting off the cage and, closing that distance and putting his power strikes to use. I think if Buckley could somehow make 170 pounds, I don't know if he can, I don't know if it's easy, but I think he could find a lot more sustained success at 170 pounds. Fighters are simply shorter, and I think you could, do some good work in that division. Now, we're going to go to Nathaniel Wood versus Charles Jourdain. Nathaniel Wood really, really impressed me. Really, really impressed me here. He did a really good job of fighting his fight. He was on the inside and landed some really good boxing combinations, some good trips. And I was surprised Jourdain didn't fight more from a range, from a little bit of a wider distance. But nonetheless, Nathaniel Wood continued to do really good work, solid boxing combinations, put those hands on display. I really liked what I saw from Nathaniel Wood, and he did it against a guy in Charles Jourdain who I think very highly of, and that is someone who, if you can beat Jourdain, I think you can make a run at the top 15 in this division. I'm not sure that he gets that fight right away, but I do think it is something to consider. When I look at the guys who are not ranked in that top 15 and are currently fighting, we have Hakeem Dawodu fighting Julian Erosa. And I think if Hakeem Dawodu wins that fight, I think that Hakeem Dawodu versus Nathaniel Wood is a fight you absolutely have to make. And the winner of that should get a fight in the top 15. If they don't, go that direction, I think fights against Alex Caceres could possibly make sense. Billy Quarantillo would be an entertaining fight. Lerone Murphy, I don't know that the UFC wants to put two English guys up against each other, but Lerone Murphy versus Nathaniel would be a very, very good fight. So that's kind of what I'm thinking for the future for Nathaniel Wood. Now we're going to quickly recap some of the other fights that I liked, but we're not going to go as far in depth. Roman Kopylov got a good win over Alessio De Chirico. I know that's not how you pronounce his name, but that's how I've found myself to be pronouncing his name. It's Alessio De Chirico. But I call him De Chirico. I don't necessarily like the guy, Alessio. I don't like the time where he was, made a big stink over the UFC not interviewing fighters that lose, so he refused to do interviews after he won. I think that is stupid. They should have stuck a mic in his face after he got knocked out and said, hey, would you like to do an interview now? But yeah, I don't necessarily like the guy. Roman Kopylov got a good win. I was surprised this fight was this high in the main card. That wasn't a tremendous fight, but Roman Kopylov had a fairly good performance and really turned it up in the third round. William Gomis got a good win over Jarno Aarons. I'm not sure how good Gomis is going to be in the UFC. I'm not sure if he's going to be a top prospect. I'm not sure if he's going to be a 3-3 and get released guy. I really don't know. I could really see both of those outcomes. So I'd like to see some more of William Gomis before I, make that decision. Abbas Magomedov knocked out Dustin Stolfus in a very, very impressive bout. I do like him, and I do like his outlook in the UFC. I think he can find success. He's a little bit older, currently sits at 32, so I'm not sure how long he's going to stick around. But I do think he has some potential, and I think he can do some good work in the promotion. Nasrat Haqparast got a really good win against John Makadasi. I don't think John Makdessi is as good as he once was, but Nasrat Haqparast, did a really good job of putting some damage on him, and he really fought well. And I think that solidifies, once again, Nasrat Haqparast as one of the better fighters that is currently outside of those rankings. That has been, kind of the position that Nasrat has held for a decent while now, and then he'll lose to, elite levels of competition. I shouldn't say elite levels like that, but like his losses to Dan Hooker and Bobby Green, I think are both, those are two fighters that are slightly more talented than him. But if you're not a good fighter, you will not beat Nasrat Haqparast. But I don't think he's going to be someone who, he's going to stick around in the UFC, have a lot of good and entertaining fights, but I just don't see him being someone that, goes on a run and gets in the top 15. Firas Ziham got a good win over Michael Figlak. I know a lot of people were picking Figlak in this fight, so credit to Firas Ziham for winning. I think Ziham got a little bit of a fair stink because he was, dominated so badly by Terrence McKinney, but Terrence McKinney is a very, very good fighter, and Terrence McKinney got him out of there quick. So if you're going to beat Terrence McKinney, you kind of got to hang around and, get him to gas a little bit, but Firas Ziham was unable to do that, so he didn't really have the same success as he could have. Well, I'm not saying he can beat Terrence McKinney. I think Terrence McKinney wins that fight 9 times out of 10, maybe more. But I don't think he is as bad as he was made out to be. Benoit Saint Denis got a win in his home country of France. He's really had a good turnaround since his one really, really bad beating that he took. So he landed some good shots, got a good win, so credit to him. And then Christian Quinones got himself a good win in his UFC debut, coming off the Contender Series. Christian Quinones, good fighter. Stephanie Egger got back on the board with a rear naked choke win over Aline Perez. She was the victim of the no tap or tap incident that we saw a couple months ago with Mara Bueno Silva. So it was good to see her get back on the win column. I'm going to be honest, I did miss that fight because I was driving home from work while it was on. So I missed that. But, that happens sometimes. Now, thank you. This is all I have for this week. Nothing major news-wise to talk about. Not going to be that long of an episode. We're going to be back later in the week with UFC 279, headlined by Nate Diaz and Khamzat Chimaev. It's got just about everybody's favorite fighter on it. Some fan favorites. Nothing too crazy for a pay-per-view, but some good fights that I'd like to talk about. So we are going to do a UFC 279 preview later in the week. That wasn't a sentence, but what I was going to say was I'd like to get it done on Friday and get it posted on Friday. That is the day you can expect to see that. I'll walk you through all my picks and why I'm picking each fighter. So look out for that. But I might get it out on Thursday, depending on how the week goes. Going to be very busy, school and work, and this stacks up quick. But nonetheless, I thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Goodbye.
Oh! He front kicked him in the face! Kevin Lee with the ultimate